The founder of Britain's modern police force, Sir Robert Peel, said that police are the public and the public are the police. Ideally, this is how it should work. People should be able to trust their police if the police are committed to serving their community with integrity and impartiality. Although the role that police should play in society has often been debated, it is undeniable that it is the best system that we have. More police on the streets have a proven effect on the reduction of crime, particularly violent crime. In the modern era, the operations of modern-day police forces have become increasingly more intricate and wide-reaching. As the scope of crime has broadened, so have the roles and functions of the police. What began as patrolling the streets and investigating robberies and murders has evolved into multifaceted organizations that investigate everything from drug and human trafficking to cybercrimes and counterterrorism. It seems that civilizations have always required some kind of law enforcement or policing. The word police itself is a derivative of ancient Greek polis, meaning city or public. The earliest evidence that we have of police dates back to around 3000 BCE in ancient Egypt. Pharaohs appointed officials who were responsible for public safety and justice. In turn, these officials employed lower-class men, often slaves, to carry out the actual policing. This practice continued into the ancient Greek and Roman civilizations. Again, slaves captured in battle, men of lower class, or ex-criminals, were usually used to maintain order and carry out law enforcement. Policing was looked down upon as a dirty job, and police were regarded not as much higher on the pecking order than a slave. Yet, their duties were extensive. They included collecting taxes and overseeing the safe transport of state revenue in the form of gold, cattle, grain, or people. Ancient police also supervised slaves on work sites and patrolled borders and prisons. Most of these societies' wealth was stored in palaces or temples, which needed round-the-clock guarding. Again, a job for the police. However, in cases of assault or even murder, the ancient societies tended to see these as civil torts, meaning that the citizens involved had to sort it out themselves. As the Roman Empire began to decline, so did its systems and traditions, such as policing. By the 5th century CE, the only real evidence of an organized police force was in the Byzantine Empire, which is now the region surrounding Italy, Turkey, and Greece. As Europe entered its medieval period, structured policing almost ceased to exist. If any law enforcement was done, it appears to have been carried out either by the military or by the community itself. In the late 13th century in England, the Statute of Winchester declared that every citizen was responsible for raising the alarm if they witnessed a crime. If this were to happen, every other citizen was also bound to respond and try to apprehend the criminal. This notion of collective responsibility was prevalent throughout Europe and its colonies. In medieval England, this was known as a franc pledge. A franc pledge basically meant a group of people would vow for the decent, law-abiding behavior of each other. If someone broke the law, their pledges would accompany them to trial and defend them when necessary. At best, this seems to have been a very casual and problematic system of justice. In the Middle Ages, France was one of the first countries to reintroduce a regulated system of policing. The gendarmerie was a unit of soldiers that carried out basic law and order, and its officers reported to high-ranking French nobles. When the Normans invaded England in 1066, they brought their police system with them. This included the role of constables, who were responsible for maintaining the law within their allocated regions, or shires. Constables were typically from the upper classes, and their main role was to oversee the night watch for towns and villages. This meant keeping an eye on the streets, lighting lamps, and guarding city gates. As populations in European cities increased, so did their crime rates. City officials became increasingly concerned about maintaining law and order, and small units of community watchmen were set up in large areas such as London and Paris. In the 16th century in France, King Francis I set up a form of military police to patrol the country and make arrests where they saw fit. These mounted police were initially deployed to monitor fellow soldiers. However, over time, they also began policing citizens in general. In 1611, Scotland's Edinburgh set up a statutory police force of constables to patrol the streets. Until then, policing was done by the community at large under the orders of feudal lords. In 1666, King Louis XIV of France made it official by establishing the first modern police force. The mounted military police had been effective in maintaining order in rural areas. However, crime was still a problem in the bigger cities such as Paris. This new police force had a hierarchical structure and was legally approved by the king. This meant greater power and clearer guidelines on how to go about enforcing the law. Other countries such as England looked on with interest. At this stage, many citizens in urban areas had taken to hiring their own private police or watchmen to protect their valuables and escort them on lengthy trips. By the end of the 18th century, crime in big cities such as London was becoming a serious problem. Citizens ran the risk of being robbed or even murdered if they ventured out at night. Highwaymen terrorized people commuting between cities, and pickpockets, prostitutes, and drunks filled the city to the brim. In the 18th century, London in particular had undergone a huge social upheaval. The population soared to over 1 million. Many people lived in confined spaces, and there was a pronounced gap between the haves and the have-nots. It was clear that a more organized official type of police force was needed, not unlike that which had been successfully established in France. In 1829, the then British Home Secretary, Sir Robert Peel, established England's first official police force. The headquarters was known as Scotland Yard and was based in Westminster, London. 1,000 new constables were sworn in. They were nicknamed Bobbies in reference to Peel's first name, a nickname that's still used today. Peel brought much-needed structure and much-needed clarity to the police force. The new constables were uninformed and received training in dealing with the public and apprehending offenders. The police became professional and reported to the Home Secretary. Peel's initiative set the tone for policing around the world today. He was adamant that each police officer be aware of their duty to serve the public with impartiality. He also introduced several measures that are still used around the world today, such as training programs and allocating badge numbers to officers. Although the public was initially wary of the new officers patrolling the streets, the success was almost immediate. The numbers of violent crimes and robberies began to decrease, and Peel ordered cities and regions outside London to set up their own police forces. Everybody jumped on board, and by 1851, there were over 13,000 police officers in England in 178 towns. Peel's model was quickly embraced by other countries. The early police forces in the US, Canada, and Australia all based their structure and policies on the British system. Police officers were expected to represent safety. They were expected to represent justice to the public. They were also only to use force when necessary and to continually work on forming strong relationships with the community. In 1844, New York became the first American city to set up an official police force. It was soon followed by other cities, with Boston, Philadelphia, and Chicago all establishing police units of their own. The formative years of police in the UK, America, Canada, and Australia were very much crime prevention models. There was little investigative work and few, if any, detectives on the payroll. Immigrants were flowing into cities, which were becoming melting pots, and tensions often boiled over. Many police officers had their hands full with a growing list of responsibilities. For example, in Australia, police were expected to not only apprehend wanted criminals, but to also enforce any necessary corporal punishments. In the early 20th century, American police faced huge challenges with the spike of organized crime as a result of prohibition. Gradually, though, often through trial and error, police forces settled on the best structures to suit their particular societies. Investigative departments were included, and the scope of policing became wider. As international travel became increasingly accessible, criminals were able to travel overseas and set up networks of various illegal operations. This meant that police forces around the world became collaborative, providing assistance and information at the request of foreign agencies. Police forces today are massive organizations. London and Tokyo have around 43,000 personnel, while New York has about 50,000 officers and staff. Today, the policing challenges are bigger than ever. Not only has crime become more elaborate and technologically developed, but many police departments suffer from a lack of resources and they're just understaffed. On the whole, though, policing does work. Violent crimes have been declining in American cities for the past decade, although newer cybercrimes have started to emerge. Crime will always be an issue for society, so effective policing is going to remain just as important. The key going forward is for police officers to adapt to new technologies while also continuing to utilize human innovation. And, to paraphrase Sir Robert Peel, for police to always be committed to the interests of community welfare.